Hi guys, what is better than one Brexiteer that doesn't understand Brexit? Two Brexiteers that don't understand Brexit. Here we have Ben Habib, former member of the Brexit Party, speaking to David Bull, a former member of the Brexit Party, about how Brexit isn't working because of the mean EU. You see, the people who sold the public a lie are attempting to distance themselves from the reality of that lie. Everything will be better when we leave the EU. But now that it isn't, they need to blame someone other than themselves. Have a listen to this.
This is the trade and cooperation agreement kicking in. And admittedly, yes, theoretically, we are entitled now to catch another 30,000 tonnes. But it's not a new deal. This deal is 2 years old. And the crucial thing people need to remember is that the vast majority of fish in the English Channel, in the North Sea, are still, in our territorial waters, are still caught by EU boats.
Okay, they're not EU boats. They're boats that are registered to businesses and fishermen in EU member states. They're not EU boats. Okay, let's cut the crap here. But why is that? It's because British fishermen in the 1980s and 1990s sold off their licenses to EU-based fishing fleets. That's why they're being caught in UK waters. Nothing to do with Brexit, nothing to do with the EU. This is British fishermen selling their licenses to EU-based fishing fleets.
Not by British boats. They have 1,700 licenses to come into our territorial waters, and 150 of those licenses allow them to come straight down to our 6-mile limit, which, is where fish breed.
But how did we ever allow this? Because June Mummery, who was an MEP with us, she will be incandescent at what's going on.
It is. I mean, the real tragedy here. Let's just walk back a bit from the agreement we have with the EU. The real tragedy here is that the EU has been abusing our waters for the last 40 years, ever since.
What do you mean the EU has been abusing? Once again, this idea that the EU is something separate. When the UK was a member of the EU was always something separate. Not that the UK was part of it or was part of the decision making. My God, these people are still trying to sell the idea that when the UK was a member, the EU was something foreign. The EU was abusing our waters. The UK was a member. The UK had the veto. The reason that all these fleets were coming in, these foreign fleets, was because UK-based fishermen sold off their licenses. They said, we're not planning to fish here. You can have our license, and we're going to make some money out of selling these licenses. That's the consequence of that. Now, unfortunately, what Ben Habib is going to say next is correct. There is damage being done to the ecosystem because of these trawlers. But that's nothing to do with the EU. That's the British government agreeing to something that they didn't have to agree to. Remember back in 2020 when it came to Brexit, the TCA, this agreement between the EU and the UK. Fishing was front and center. And I said before that fishing as an industry is smaller than or it's about the same size as the lawnmower industry. While banking, financial services, manufacturing were all forgotten about, and fishing was put front and center.
Since the common, since the CFP, the Common Fisheries Policy, was put in place, and there are very, very few fish left in the channel. They bring in their industrial-sized boats.
These are the super trawlers.
The super trawlers. They hoover up the seabed, killing fish that are trying to breed. They net dolphins and chuck them out dead. They keep what they want, throw away everything they don't want. They're damaging the environment incredibly. So much so that, they bang this drum about...
So isn't it strange that Ben Habib didn't have a problem with this activity before Brexit? I never heard Ben Habib complaining about this before. Never complained about British fleets doing similar things. Now, the British fleets are much smaller because the problem for the British fleets is that whatever fish they catch, and we've talked about this before, fish are not don't stay in one place. Fish or not, there isn't British fish or French fish. Fish move around. They don't have passports. They start breeding in one area and then they finish their life cycle in another area. And that could be across a political border. So there are no British fish or French fish or European fish or whatever. That's why it's important that the UK and the EU work together to preserve stocks, to preserve the environment. Now, I'm critical of the Common Fisheries Policy and other policies within the EU. But in order to change them, you have to be part of the club. You have to try and reform it. I don't believe for a second that Ben Habib cares about the environment here. He's just using it as a political football. Look, I care now about these fish and about these dolphins and everything, and now I'm standing up against the EU. Well, if somebody had told you, as people did back in 2016, this would be actually damaging for the UK environment. Do you think Ben Habib gave a crap back then? Of course not.
Sustainable resources and renewable resources. Well, the most tangible renewable resource that we have in the United Kingdom is our fish, and it's being used and abused by the EU.
Used and abused by the EU. So you said this is the most tangible resource. Okay, but you agreed with putting in barriers to the trade of that fish. So the fish that the UK fishing fleet catch, they want to sell it into the EU because people in Britain don't really like the fish that are caught by British trawlers. You campaigned for barriers, even a stronger Brexit than Boris Johnson delivered. You campaigned for stronger barriers against trade with the EU. So you wanted it to be more difficult for fishermen and fisherwomen to operate. And now you're complaining about the consequences of Brexit. When it comes to the Common Fisheries Policy, yes, I'm very critical of that. But as I said, if you want to reform it, you have to do it from within. You can't reform it from without. And complaining about Boris Johnson's deal is a bit late now because it's a consequence of Brexit. This is the same guy who complains about the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is something that, in a sense, he campaigned for. Now, when it comes to the Northern Ireland Protocol, he actually voted for. Ben Habib voted for this. These are people who don't understand the consequences of their actions, or just don't care. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.